Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and today we want to talk about the most in-depth investigative report on monopolies when it comes to competition in the digital marketplace that we have ever seen. Now, the name of the report is the Investigation of Competition in Digital Markets, Majority Staff Reports and Recommendations, Subcommittee on Antitrust, Commercial and Administrative Law of the Committee of the Judiciary. Now, this is a summary of the full report, which is fairly extensive and conclusive, and I'm going to let Kelley give a quick introduction to this, and then we'll move forward.
All right. The subcommittee is comprised of 8 individuals. They're obviously a subcommittee of the Committee on the Judiciary. For the purpose of these videos, we'll obviously refer to them as just the subcommittee. And when we say the committee, we're talking about the overarching Committee on the Judiciary. This is just over the introduction. The introduction was so concise already. It's about 25 pages that we had to leave out an enormous amount of information. But we wanted to keep this video short because the others are going to be quite long. And that information that we left out is going to be covered in further sections. The second section is the actual investigation itself, and it's the request for information for first parties, third parties, antitrust agencies. It includes hearings and roundtables and prior investigations, and then it goes into the background of the markets that the investigation takes place in. The next section is markets investigated. And for the entire investigation focuses on 4 firms. And they are firms because they each own many, many companies now. And that's Google, Facebook, Apple, and Amazon. The next section would be dominant online platforms. Obviously, it's going to focus on those 4. And then the last section is recommendations. What else? I guess you can take it away.
And like I said, this is just an intro to the actual report. And if you want to go read it, we'll put a link in the description down below, so you can go read the entire report if you want to. It's 450 pages, so it's quite extensive. That's why we're summarizing right here.
Also, it includes both the chair's forward as well as the executive summary. That's what that comprises the entire summary.
Yes, and it includes all the names of the people on the subcommittees as well, and everybody that participated in it. So if this is something you want to take action on in the future, their names are there. So if you want to get in contact with them, then you can. So let's talk about the report, what it is, how it started. So it started in June of 2019. It's the Subcommittee on Antitrust, Commercial, and Administrative Law. It's a subcommittee of the Committee of the Judiciary. And from here on out, we're just going to refer to it as a subcommittee, so we don't have to say the entire name just for the sake of saving time.
It is an old subcommittee. It's gone through various name changes.
Yes. It was the subcommittee initiated an investigation of online competition with a focus on Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google. The subcommittee also reviewed current antitrust laws, competition policies, and the enforcement of them. Now, like we said, the report was 450 pages, but the record for the report, the entire scope of the investigation, includes 1,287,997 documents and communications. They have 38 witness testimonies, 1,800 pages of hearing records, 38 submissions from 60 antitrust experts, interviews with 240 market participants, former employees, and others, totaling thousands of hours. The investigation convened with industry and government witnesses, subject matter experts, and reviewed large volumes of evidence provided by industry participants and regulators. So as you can see, this was a massive undertaking for such a small number of people that sat on the subcommittee, and it spanned from June of 2019 all the way through near the end of 2020. So it was a fairly long investigation, and we will obviously in the later sections or later videos go into more of what happened. So let's talk about the sins of the firm, and that is a pretty concise term, and it really captures what these firms have done. The 4 were found to control access to certain markets. So not just the markets themselves, but access into those markets. They were also seen to be acting as gatekeepers to those markets while competing in them. They were found to be guilty of charging exorbitant fees, imposing oppressive contracts, and extracting valuable data from individuals and businesses. They were found to survey the market to identify potential rivals, which they would then buy out, copy, or cut off from the market. And so that's pretty important. So they're surveying the markets before these people even get into the markets or before they can become big.
They do one of the indicative traits of control in a digital market is you have an enormous data advantage over your competitors, which allows them to conduct that surveillance.
Yeah, and since they offer not only the platform, for instance, like Alphabet, which is Google, they offer the platform for providing the information, they also see all that information first, and they can control it. They're also found guilty of self-preferencing, like we just mentioned, to reinforce their dominant market positions, and they were found to impose arbitrary pseudo-regulations that they themselves were not beholden to. So making a bunch of rules and laws for people that want to get into their marketplace, but not following them themselves. Now, the conclusions of the finding, these firms, they were found to erode entrepreneurship, degrade citizens' privacy, and erode the free and diverse press. Ultimately, the result is less innovation, less robust markets, and weakened democracy. Furthermore, the current antitrust authorities were found to be negligent in their duties to enforce antitrust policy and protect U.S. citizens. And that's kind of interesting because when you talk about these firms, a lot of times people just think you're just talking about, a firm or a company or, somebody that's providing a product. But that's not really what's happening here. They're controlling information, both private and public. They're, controlling news sources, which news sources get recognized. They control information in general.
And with the exception of Facebook, they've all become increasingly more difficult to define.
Yes.
Amazon owns a lot of companies that actually compete in its own market, as well as it has a web service now. Google has the monopolies, obviously, in search and browser technology, as well as GPS, maps, and probably a lot of others that I can't think of right now. And then, of course, Apple is a little bit easier to define too, but a lot of these companies are buying up servers and building servers. So they're increasingly becoming more complex and owning companies down the supply chain and up the supply chain.
Yeah. And it's also important to remember that even though we're talking about these 4 companies, there are a few more companies. Like we're talking about Apple, that makes me think of Microsoft on the other side of it, which could have been included in this report, but obviously there's only so much you can look at in such a short span of time.
And most notably of all, software management companies like SolarWinds and the Czech company that we talked about in a video, they've become monopolies in their own space. They've caused governments all over the world to have insecure network breaches. They've had emails compromised because they're releasing an inferior product because they have no competition. But with the extent of this report, it's obvious why they had to go with just 4.
So let's look at some of the examples of the conduct of these companies. Of Facebook's nearly 100 acquisitions over a span of its existence, the Federal Trade Commission, or the FTC, investigated just one, and that was the Instagram merger in 2012.
Which they obviously allowed to pass.
Yes, and I need to reiterate this as is very interesting because I think a lot of this is going to fall, a lot of people that are going to be looking at this will probably be conservatives or consider themselves Republicans. And we talk about this all the time between us, but one thing you need to remember is that the FTC is run by 5 people in Congress, and the majority of them are Republican. And it has been like that for a while now. And so this is one thing that's always important to remember, that it's not just this black and white, dichotomy of, well, it's the conservatives versus Democrats or the left versus the right. In terms of this, obviously these massive mergers that are happening by these firms or these companies, it's being let go by a Republican-run FTC. So just keep that in the back of your mind when you're thinking about these things. It's not just like, oh, Silicon Valley and the left versus everybody else. No, these things are being, let go by a majority-held conservative FTC commission.
And furthermore, the Federal Trade Commission is obviously an antitrust authority. There are other antitrust authorities within the DOJ. And it's important to note that the subcommittee acts as the principal authority on this matter. And so it has jurisdiction over these other sub-departments.
Mhm.
And so if anyone was actually interested in antitrust enforcement, they're going to follow the subcommittee first,
Mhm.
because whatever happens at the subcommittee is going to trickle down to these others.
Yeah.
Obviously, the Federal Trade Commission has been negligent in its duties for a very long time now. Otherwise, we wouldn't be sitting where we are now.
Yeah. Continuing on in examples of their conduct, another point about Facebook is that it used superior market intelligence to identify and then acquire, copy, and kill threats and selectively enforce its platform policies based on whether it perceives other companies as competitive threats. In the absence of competition, Facebook's quality has deteriorated over time, resulting in worse privacy protections for its users and a dramatic rise in misinformation on its platform. And that is another thing that is interesting to note, that as these companies or firms get bigger and bigger, and the more they take over, there's less competition. And less competition means less innovation, and less innovation means a worse product and also worse security measures, like it says. So, these foreign firms or a foreign company or a foreign country even can, hack in or can invade these social media platforms.
The SolarWinds breach is a perfect example.
It's a massive breach. And so that's one big reason why it's always good to have competition in the marketplace, because it drives innovation in many different areas. All right, next let's look at one look at Google, also known as Alphabet. Alphabet is their parent company of Google. Google misappropriated content from third parties to boost Google's own inferior vertical offerings, while imposing search penalties to demote third-party vertical providers. Google has blurred the distinction between paid ads and organic results on its searches, and has begun siphoning off traffic from the rest of the web.
Now, Google does have certain searches where someone who owns a site has the option of uploading their site, sometimes as a condensed version, onto a Google server.
Yeah.
And what happens is if a user follows that link and ends up on a Google server, it becomes more difficult to escape the Google servers. Yeah. This has been an issue for at least 10 years now.
And it is interesting to know that Google has, what it says, blurred the lines between paid ads and organic results. So what that could mean is, you're not sure, but it might mean that if you're paid, or you pay to have your ads, or you pay to have your website or your company or whatever may be promoted, then you get put into, the front of the line once you get into their servers. And if you don't, then you get left out of their servers, and you may not get noticed at all. Google has also required smartphone manufacturers to pre-install and give default status to Google's own apps, such as Google Chrome. If you have an iPhone, everybody has that. You'll notice that Google Chrome always comes pre-installed along with Safari on iPhones. And if you go to open anything, it will give you usually just one of two options, and that's Google Chrome or Safari. And they've programmed it that way on purpose so that you only use one of the two options.
In fact, I'll be writing an article pretty soon over this, where if you actually want to use a phone and not use any Google products, you have to actually de-Google the phone. And you actually, what you do is, they have such control over the market that you have to create a proxy Google, and that's what these de-Googled phones do. They have this program. It's a proxy Google, where the operating system of your phone don't actually know that you're going through fake Google, but you are, and it's meant to protect the user from Google, from spying campaigns that Google's been a part of.
Another thing for Google, they not only control general search, but through Chrome, like we mentioned, Google owns the world's most powerful browser. Through Google Maps, Google consists of 80% of navigation mapping services. Through Google Cloud, Google dominates the Internet of Things. They increasingly function as an ecosystem of interlocking monopolies now. And like we said before, they provide their own ecosystem of servers. So unless you're in a Google server, even though you're using Google and you think you're accessing the World Wide Web, you're only accessing a part of the web that Google wants you to actually access. So you're being limited in your search options.
And furthermore, I'm going to be reporting in the future on these cohorts that Google, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter will place individuals in. They use certain software. Some viewers might know this as shadow banning, but they have special software, special techniques for grouping like-minded individuals into a cohort and then manipulating their results, whether they're search results or a news feed in, say, Facebook. I'll also be writing on that.
Next company, third company you want to look at is Amazon. Another example of one of their sins is Amazon acquired Diapers.com and Zappos and companies in adjacent markets including consumer data that allows Amazon to self-preference it in its market. And when we talk about self-preference or vertical preference or things like that, the example that we like to use is we've talked about Walmart. Now Walmart does an example of Walmart's vertical marketing is Walmart has their stores, their company, Sam's Club, but then they also buy and control their own fleet of 18-wheelers. So not only do they have their own products in their own stores, they can also control the shipping mechanism between those stores. So they control what is down the chain from them, and they also control what is up the chain from them. And in the case of Google or Amazon or one of these firms, they do that not only in the physical plane, but also in the internet plane or the software plane. So they control what's up and down from them. So that's what we mean by the monopoly of them. The fourth company that they looked at was Apple. Apple leverages the control of iOS and the App Store to create barriers to competitors while self-preferencing, like the rest of these companies do, to its own products. Apple exploits developers through misappropriation of competitively sensitive information, and they charge exorbitant charges or fees.
Now, remember, this is just a summary. The other three were also guilty of creating barriers within their markets, within several markets.
Yes.
They're essentially all guilty of most of the same crimes. Obviously, for brevity's sake, we left a lot of those out.
The testimonies and submissions that were done during this hearing show that the dominance of the firms has contributed to the decline of trustworthy sources of news and on the production and availability of trustworthy sources of news. Investors also avoid investing in competitors of the four. Dominant firms offer fewer privacy protections, and the quality of their services has deteriorated because of it. Courts and enforcers have found the four to engage in recidivism, repeatedly violating laws and court orders. Lastly, their power directly coincides with their influence over the policy-making process. By lobbying and funding think tanks and academics, the four have expanded their sphere of influence, further shaping how they are governed and regulated. And so a quick note on that, stay tuned for next week, and we're going to be talking about that and how they have repeatedly violated laws and court orders and calls to show up to court and to answer for a lot of the sins that they've committed.
3 deadlines, was it?
3 deadlines that were missed by all 4 companies. That'll be something that we'll talk about next time. The subcommittee states that it was Congress that enacted the antitrust laws, and Congress must modernize them. The subcommittee also confirms that antitrust authorities have failed on multiple occasions to stop monopolies and protect American citizens. Now, one thing that you want to know is that obviously this is just the introduction, so we for brevity's sake, made it very short, but in the future, or the next few videos, we're going to be going into depth on a lot of these subjects and showing what these companies have done, how they've violated laws, how they've ignored laws, how they've ignored court orders, how they will claim that their rights are being violated in order to withhold information that would actually indict them or indicate that they've done something wrong or illegal. So that's going to be something to remember. So just remember, this is just introduction and it's very basic, but there's a lot more coming.